Hi, welcome to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. And on tonight's show, Congress questions the Education Secretary on campus protests. American citizens are repatriated from Syria, and Tik Tok sues the government over its impending ban. But before we get into the news, FISM's Ian Patrick is joining me once again today. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Renata. It's good to be alongside you once again. And, I just want to mention at the intro there, you were talking about the campus protests with the Education Secretary being interviewed. I just think it's kind of incredible that these protests are still going on as long as they have been. It's been really a crazy couple of days that we've been reporting on all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're just starting to see the aftermath of all that. But before we get into that news coverage, Republicans are increasingly concerned that the Biden administration is weaponizing a 2021 executive order to boost Democratic turnout in the upcoming election. The order mandates that federal agencies create voter registration plans with approved outside groups. These groups are supposed to be nonpartisan. Republicans fear that taxpayers are footing the bill for illegal registration efforts, but the White House rebuffs congressional efforts to learn more about those meetings and plans.
Back to Executive Order 14019 and the Biden administration's pledge to be, quote, the most transparent presidential administration ever. Surely, the Biden administration is going to go above and beyond to be transparent and explain exactly how this order is being implemented, right? Wrong. In fact, in the 3 years since this order was issued, the Biden administration has done the exact opposite.
Of particular concern is a 2021 meeting between the White House and left-wing activists that the Washington Examiner reported on last week. Notes show that they discussed registering non-citizens and requiring registration for public housing. In related news, a House committee is investigating whether the Biden administration is funneling resources to register voters in the swing state of Michigan. Notably, 88% of outreach events were scheduled in Democrat-majority counties. The congressional committee subpoenaed the Small Business Administration yesterday after 2 officials failed to appear for scheduled interviews.
And on the other side of the aisle, House Democrats are calling on President Biden to take executive action on the crisis at the southern border. 14 representatives signed a letter saying the president has all the tools at his disposal to slow illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking. The plea to restore order comes from mostly frontliners who are at risk of actually losing their seats this upcoming November. However, the group also blasted Republicans for failing to pass immigration reforms. Meanwhile, the White House said yesterday they currently have no new executive orders on the issue to announce.
I don't have any announcement on any executive actions. Obviously, we look at all options. We believe the challenges at the border is a priority, important to a majority of Americans. We believe that the immigration system is not even something we believe, it's fact, has been broken for decades now, and that's why the president took action on his first day in office and put forth a comprehensive legislation.
Now, it is worth noting that action that Karine Jean-Pierre was talking about there is when President Biden issued nearly 300 executive orders since day one on immigration, which dismantled many Trump-era policies.
Meanwhile, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona came under fire yesterday for not willing to bar pro-Hamas agitators from having their student loans canceled. Cardona testified before the House Committee on Education and the Workforce regarding multiple topics, including the ongoing college protests. Republican lawmakers grilled Cardona for his lack of leadership over anti-Semitism on elite campuses. Committee Chairwoman Virginia Fox asked the Secretary if he believed taxpayer money should support students who exhibit unacceptable behavior on campus. Cardona merely responded, quote, students who are breaking the law and are disrupting the educational environment should be held to account. Similarly, Cardona told Representative Tim Walberg that the department was taking the issue seriously, but also shifted the blame on lack of funding for his slow response.
I'm sure you know, sir, I cannot speak on open cases. What I can tell you is that we're taking these cases very seriously. We condemn anti-Semitism and any forms of hate on campus, and we're moving as quickly as we can. Your support of our budget proposal, sir, would help us move that along.
Republicans have been against the Biden administration's effort to shift student debt over to taxpayers, and the college protests have served as an additional reason for their case.
And while we're on the topic of those college protests, let's take a look at a few notable updates. First and foremost, protesters at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology have reportedly reclaimed their encampment after it was cleared out by police. Protesters at MIT were given a deadline on Monday to clear out of their encampment voluntarily or be suspended. Some students actually reportedly remained throughout the afternoon into the next day, and by the next day, demonstrators returned in full. At George Washington University, meanwhile, in D.C., protesters there have begun making a new demand to college faculty. In addition to calling for the university to divest from trade with Israel, the protesters are also demanding that it refrain from calling police to clear their encampment, probably to try and avoid what happened at MIT. Finally, the last notable update on the protests comes from an investigative report. According to ADN American, Cuba has spent years training some of the protest organizers behind these anti-Israel movements. These organizers are part of various different organizations which all seem to be against Israel, or at the very least, in support of a Palestinian state.
Meanwhile, some members of the far-left squad are making headlines with regards to the war in Gaza, such as Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar. On Tuesday, Omar became the target of a censure resolution put forward by Nebraska Republican Representative Don Bacon. The legislation is meant to rebuke Omar for anti-Semitic remarks made recently. In an announcement on X, Bacon said he aims to hold both the pro-Hamas protesters and their enablers in Congress accountable. The comment in question surfaced after Omar visited Columbia University. Taking questions from a reporter, Omar likened the protest to being pro-genocide or anti-genocide.
So I actually met a lot of Jewish students that are in the encampment, and I think it is really unfortunate that people don't care about the fact that all Jewish kids should be kept safe and that we should not have to tolerate anti-Semitism or bigotry for all Jewish students, whether they are pro-genocide or anti-genocide.
Bacon said the resolution will not be immediately put on the House floor. Rather, he will work with Speaker Mike Johnson and other GOP leaders on finding the right time to bring it forward. Ironically, this is just the latest example of Omar being accused and acted against for anti-Semitic remarks. Representative Rashida Tlaib has also landed herself in hot water recently after she called for the ICC to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And when we come back, we take a look at the war in Gaza and in Ukraine, so stick around for those updates.
For $28, you can sponsor an ultrasound scan that will enable an abortion-minded woman to hear the heartbeat of her baby. 90% of the time when this happens, that sound will change a woman's mind and cause her to keep the baby. And guess what? An anonymous donor is matching your gift. For every 200 scans underwritten, an ultrasound machine will be purchased and placed in a life-saving preborn clinic. Go to preborn.com/FISM to give today. That's preborn.com/FISM.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
Did you know that you can always listen and watch Financial Issues online? Just go to financialissues.org/live or download the FISM TV app in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. We stream our show every weekday morning starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. If you're looking for a biblical take on investing and current events and how it relates to the money that God has given you, then you don't want to miss Financial Issues.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's take a look now at news coming out of the war in Gaza, where the Israeli military issued overnight airstrikes on the city of Rafah shortly after beginning a limited operation within the city. Now, that operation began when with the Israeli military taking operational control of the Gazan side of the Rafah border, crossing into Egypt. Shortly after this was announced, world leaders began expressing concern over a worsening humanitarian crisis for the citizens of Gaza. Israel later announced that it would actually open another aid entry point, that being the Kerem Shalom crossing. That crossing into Gaza was closed by Israel on Sunday after Hamas launched rockets from the area, ultimately killing 4 Israeli soldiers. Israel notified international organizations that it would be reopening that crossing specifically for humanitarian aid purposes. And a statement from the military said it has already seen trucks from Egypt carrying everything from food to water to other equipment to the crossing.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is pausing some bomb shipments to Israel as the country is trying to discourage Israel from its large-scale operation in Rafah. The Biden administration has put a pause on 2 shipments for fear that the precision bombs would be used in Rafah. A U.S. official told Fox News Digital, quote, "The U.S. position has been that Israel should not launch a major ground operation in Rafah, where more than 1 million people are sheltering with nowhere else to go." The official added that discussions with Israel are ongoing, but they have not fully addressed U.S. concerns. The official went on to say that the pause on shipments refers to future transfers only, not imminent transfers. The administration's action is also separate from the supplemental aid bill passed last month.
Meanwhile, a new investigation has unveiled that the American government has reportedly been working with an outside anti-Israel group since at least 2022. The data from this investigation comes courtesy of the Washington Free Beacon via conservative watchdog group America First Legal. Citing internal government emails, the investigation shows correspondences between the U.S. government and a human rights group known as Democracy for the Arab World Now, or DAWN for short. As early as 2022, DAWN began an anti-Israel lobbying campaign to both the state and defense departments in order to try and place sanctions on Jewish Israelis living in the West Bank. Oddly enough, the Biden administration did issue sanctions against Israelis that were allegedly stoking violence in the area. And even more so, a 3-star general familiar with these emails was recently identified as a main figure in making that sanction decision. One Republican official familiar with that investigation said that all of this, quote, confirms that Biden officials were coordinating with fringe anti-Israel NGOs to undermine Israel and Israeli Jews for years. But the government has not yet elaborated on its relationship with this group.
Meanwhile, yesterday, the U.S. repatriated several U.S. citizens from northeast Syria, including Canadian minors. The U.S. Department of State said that the largest ever single repatriation effort from Syria included 11 adult U.S. citizens and 6 Canadian minors. The department says there are about 30,000 individuals from more than 60 countries outside Syria who remain in displaced persons camps, and the majority of whom are children. The U.S. argues that the only durable solution to the humanitarian and security crisis in these camps and detention facilities is for countries to repatriate, rehabilitate, reintegrate, and where appropriate, ensure accountability for wrongdoing. The statement added that the U.S. remains committed to helping other countries with repatriating their citizens and finding solutions for those who are unable to return to their communities or countries of origin.
All right, and let's shift focus now to the war in Ukraine, where Russian forces attempted to deal a crushing blow to the nation on a day that celebrates the defeat of Nazism in World War II. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the massive attack used over 50 missiles and more than 20 drones. The nighttime strikes spread throughout 7 different regions in Ukraine while targeting critical infrastructure. Officials have only reported 3 injuries from the barrage, but sadly that did include an 8-year-old girl among them. Ukraine celebrates its Nazi defeat day on May 8th, and in a social media statement, Zelensky equated Russia's invasion with Hitler's attempt to conquer wide swaths of Europe. He pleads that only a united free world can act to stop the new Moscow Nazis. Meanwhile, the airstrikes themselves are an anomaly in recent weeks after Russia scaled back its bombardment. Ukrainian officials expect Moscow is preparing for a new major battlefield offensive.
And still in that area of the world, Ukraine's spy agency allegedly foiled another assassination plot against President Volodymyr Zelensky. The SBU announced yesterday it discovered a network of secret Russian agents preparing for an assassination attempt that would have used missiles and a drone. The security agency arrested 2 colonels who supervised the Ukrainian president's security, claiming they acted as Russian spies. The network also intended to take out the intelligence director this past week. Meanwhile, Russia denies targeting the Ukrainian president and other high-ranking officials. And up next, we return to national and political coverage here. But first, let's go to FISM Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In today's world, the most popular weapon of choice in warfare is obviously the firearm. Guns come in many different forms today, including pistols, machine guns, rifles, and other forms of artillery. But for the majority of human history, guns were not the main weapon of warfare. In fact, throughout the history of war, one weapon has traversed the scope of human history and permeated virtually all cultures, and even today, variations of it are still used in certain combat situations. This is what's known as the king of weapons in warfare, the sword. So the sword's origin story is found in the knife and dagger, tools that have been used since the beginning of time. In very ancient times, these tools were used for cutting and carving food and shelter, and eventually they found a use in warfare as well. Now we go back 5,000 years to where the first swords began to take shape as people realized how effective knives and daggers could be on the battlefield if they were just a little bit longer. So we have the introduction of the sword in battle. Now, in the Near East, certain cultural trends began to develop in the making of the sword. Greek and Roman swords tended to be shorter in length, but straight and two-edged. Further in the East, we begin to see the development of the curved sword, which would become the dominant weapon in medieval Islam, but that comes a little later. Now, speaking of the Middle Ages, it was here in the West that we see the sword reach its high watermark in weaponry on the field of battle. As the art of knighthood and cavalry grew, soldiers began to realize they needed longer, more powerful and strong weapons to defeat their foes. So in the High Middle Ages, we see the introduction of the two-handed broadsword, a massive weapon that gave the wielder both a long reach and the potential for maximum damage, which with each thrust and slash. This is also where we see the high watermark of hand-to-hand combat in warfare, because in the East, technological advancements were being made in the High Middle Ages that would change warfare forever. This would come with the introduction of gunpowder in warfare. We've explored this in another moment in history, and it would reach Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries. Still, the rise of guns and cannons did not completely eradicate the sword. Throughout the early modern period, that's roughly the 15th to the 18th centuries, many soldiers still carried swords with them and prepared for hand-to-hand combat, knowing, for example, that they would eventually run out of ammo, or understanding that their firearms could often misfire. So in this time period, we see the introduction of the rapier. Now, that's a thin sword with an extravagant hilt used mainly for dueling and somewhat for decoration as well. So we go into the 20th century, where the sword has diminished to mainly the sport of fencing and play acting, but still even today, soldiers in all cultures are taught hand-to-hand combat with a sharp blade. Now, the sword may not be the preeminent weapon of choice as it was 600 years ago and before, but until the Lord returns and warfare is no more, I suspect the sword will always be in use, at least on some level. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Many mothers find strength in the experience of giving birth as they overcome physical challenges and embrace the journey of bringing a new life into the world. You can help an abortion-minded mother receive discipleship, encouragement, and the strength needed to have her baby. During the month of May, you can bless your mom for Mother's Day by giving to Preborn on your mother's behalf. Go to preborn.com/FISM to give. That's preborn.com/FISM.
Are you new to biblically responsible investing? As Christians, we have the responsibility to be good stewards of the money God has entrusted us with. As we invest in the market, we want to make sure that the companies we invest in aren't taking money and using it to fund industries that grieve the heart of God, like pornography, abortion, gambling, or the LGBT agenda. That doesn't mean a company must be a Christian company to be biblically responsible. It means that company is solely focused on excellence in its industry and doesn't support things that God hates. To learn more about biblically responsible investing and how you can put it to practice in your portfolio, go to financialissues.org.
The mission of Financial Issues is to expose Jesus for all he is, all he means, and all that he can do.
And welcome back once again to FISM News. We return with some national coverage, starting with updates to deadly storms across the United States. Tens of thousands of Americans were without power yesterday after a swath of tornadoes wrecked Oklahoma and the Plains region. Multiple tornadoes were spotted in the Sooner State and in Missouri on Monday. Those knocked out power for roughly 14,000 people and unfortunately killed at least one person. More than 40,000 lost power in Colorado, which saw wind speeds up to 90 miles per hour. And that same storm system also threw 4 tornadoes in Michigan just yesterday. Parts of central and eastern U.S. remain under tornado and thunderstorm watches today as well. The National Weather Service lists Austin, Texas, which was the site of mass flooding earlier this week, as one of the cities most at risk from the extreme weather. So keep all families in those areas in your prayers.
Meanwhile, some updates from big tech. TikTok is suing the U.S. government for forcing the company to part with its Chinese owner. This comes as a bill was passed last month that said the app must be sold to the U.S. or be banned from the country's marketplace. The lawsuit, which was filed yesterday in Washington, D.C., argues that the bill is unconstitutional and violates free speech protections. However, U.S. officials and lawmakers cite national security concerns as the reason for the app's potential restriction. Here's FBI Director Christopher Wray speaking on the issue.
TikTok's parent company is beholden to the Chinese government. We're talking about the ability to control or collect data on millions and millions of users and to use it for all sorts of influence operations like driving their AI efforts, which are not remotely constrained by the rule of law.
The social media app may be buying some time with the lawsuit as it will slow down the process of banning or selling the app.
Now in some more local political news, New York Attorney General Letitia James is shifting her lens to pregnancy centers with a new lawsuit. In a May 6th news release, James's office announced that it was suing Heartbeat International as well as 11 crisis pregnancy centers in the state. The lawsuit alleges that these organizations misled clients by promoting an, quote, unproven treatment designed to reverse the effects of an abortion pill. Now that abortion pill reversal service is provided through a helpline, and it advertises itself as giving, quote, your unborn child a second chance at life. The service connects clients with medical professionals that aid in the reversal process if the clients had taken the pill within 72 hours. Heartbeat International reports that thousands of lives were actually saved through this network, but AG James disagrees, saying in her statement that abortion cannot be reversed. James seeks to stop Heartbeat and the crisis centers from promoting this service, as well as seeking some civil penalties payments. And while we're on the topic of abortion and the fight for life, I'd like to just remind you to come alongside and support one of our partners, Preborn, this month of May. For as little as $28, you can provide an ultrasound scan, and as part of a donor match for this campaign, Preborn will be gifted an ultrasound machine to provide to pregnancy centers for every 200 scans purchased. Not only that, but Preborn obviously does a great job sharing the gospel with these abortion-minded mothers and with helping them get in on a good starting place as a parent. To learn more about what they do and about this campaign, go to preborn.com/FISM.
Definitely a worthy cause. Meanwhile, in some other cultural news, Boy Scouts of America is changing its name. As part of the latest inclusive effort, quote unquote, the organization will change its name to Scouting America. The organization's president and chief executive officer, Roger A. Crone, said in a statement, quote, "Though our name will be new, our mission remains unchanged. We are committed to teaching young people to be prepared for life." He added, quote, "This will be a simple but very important evolution as we seek to ensure that everyone feels welcome in Scouting." This comes as 80,000 men had filed lawsuits against Boy Scouts of America, alleging abuse when they were minors. The organization is also trying to correct its history with one LGBT member who was fired from the program in 1990. Currently, more than 1 million young people are a part of the nationwide program, including more than 176,000 girls. The new name will go into effect next year.
All right, and it's not often that we at FISM News get to really go into news regarding science, but we have a new revelation from some marine researchers. Apparently, sperm whales communicate with one another in a sophisticated manner, even slightly resembling human languages. This analysis was done by researchers from the Project SETI team, which is short for Cetacean Translation Initiative. Listening to pre-recorded calls from about 60 sperm whales, the research team used statistical analysis and artificial intelligence to aid in their discovery. And what they found was that these sperm whales are much more expressive than once thought, and even employ something similar to a phonetic alphabet. The language is expressed through clicking sounds, specifically known as codas. MIT professor Jacob Andreas breaks down the general idea of what this discovery is.
So on one hand, you have pictographic systems like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, where every word is associated with a different kind of unique picture, and there aren't actually relationships between them. And on the other hand, you have alphabetic systems like English, where there's a much smaller set of pieces that we call letters that combine to produce all the different words that we see written down. And so one way of thinking about what we're doing in this new paper is showing that sperm whale codas are more like an alphabetic system than a pictographic system, which was kind of the picture that we had before. That all of these different codas that we see are actually built by combining a comparatively simple set of smaller pieces.
Certainly a fascinating discovery and one that took them years to come to, but Andreas does admit that while we have figured out that they're speaking in a language, we don't quite know what the whales are talking about yet, but hopefully sometime in the future we might be able to know.
Yeah, that's truly fascinating to know. And to wrap up our show, the man referred to as America's pastor will receive a rare honor next week when he is permanently commemorated at the U.S. Capitol building. After years of planning, a statue of the late Reverend Billy Graham will be unveiled on May 16th, according to his evangelistic association. The 7-foot-tall statue simply labels the North Carolina native the preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Billy Graham will replace former North Carolina Governor Charles Bentley Aycock, an early 20th century segregationist. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Graham's son, Reverend Franklin Graham, will speak at the private dedication ceremony, and recording artist Michael W. Smith will also perform. And well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content. And for any updates until our next show, follow us on social media at FISM News, or download the FISM app on your smartphone. Thank you so much. God bless, and we'll see you next time.